Lewis Hamilton lost the 2021 title on the final lap of the season and has since been described by Toto Wolff as disillusioned with Formula One. I don't expect Hamilton will retire, but Wolff offered no guarantees to say that he will stay in the sport for next season, and stranger things have certainly happened in the past. So what if Lewis Hamilton was to leave Formula One? Let's have a look. My name's Andy and this is Behind the Drive. Lost faith in racing. We've seen drivers make shock retirements before. Most recently, Nico Rosberg retired just 5 days after the conclusion of his championship-winning campaign in 2016. The reason Rosberg left the sport was due to him wanting to spend more time with his family, and after that hard-fought campaign against Lewis Hamilton, you could see that Rosberg had put everything into coming out on top that year. At the time, he was 31 and had a young family which he wanted to spend more time with, and he achieved his career goal of becoming a world champion, whilst beating one of the greatest drivers in the sport's history whilst in the same machinery. For Hamilton, the decision would be significantly different. Hamilton is 36 and is statistically the most successful driver in the sport's history. He was agonisingly close to taking that step to become an 8-time world champion, which would be an unprecedented feat. And the championship was taken away from him at that final race by a race director applying the FIA sporting regulations in a way that had not been seen before, allowing some lapped cars to overtake but not others. This decision itself is a question of fairness, with only some drivers being able to overtake, meaning further down the order some drivers benefited and some lost out. To bring in a couple of examples here, Daniel Ricciardo ended up almost a lap down compared to Sebastian Vettel, only because the Aston Martin driver was allowed to unlap himself and Ricciardo wasn't. Carlos Sainz was unable to benefit from the lapped runners between him and Verstappen being removed, which meant he was unable to mount a challenge to potentially overtake Hamilton and take the second step on the podium at that race. So it wasn't just right at the front of the order where the questionable decision impacted the closing stages of the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. And the biggest loser of them all in this instance was indeed Lewis Hamilton, the driver that was described as a sitting duck by his team principal Toto Wolff, as the lapped runners were released and Verstappen, on fresh rubber, made the move stick after a confident lunge through turn 5. Had the safety car rules been implemented as we've seen in previous races, it would have certainly been a safety car finish. The cars were only able to start unlapping themselves safely as of the penultimate lap, and the safety car should come in on the following lap once those lapped cars have gone by the leader, to allow them time to catch up to the back of the pack. In this case, under those rules, the safety car would have peeled in and Hamilton would have led a procession of cars over the finish line. So I think it's understandable that Hamilton has been described as disillusioned by Wolff in that post-race weekend interview. Hamilton's raced in the sport for 15 years, and on so many occasions he's been that lead driver behind the safety car, so he knows exactly how the rules have been applied before. But the application of the rules changed in what was a pivotal moment for the history of Formula One, with the whole world watching the sport and the conclusion of one of the most exciting sporting competitions in 2021. It saw a new champion crowned, and potentially the end of an era of dominance for Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton. And given the initial feeling for Hamilton was that the race was manipulated, which is a comment he made on the team radio in those closing stages, it's understandable that in the Mercedes statement they said that they've lost faith in racing. Given the situation, I think that nobody would blame Hamilton for stepping aside. Personally, as I've said already, I don't believe he will leave. You don't win 7 world championships without being a fighter, and he has fought for every single one of those titles. So I expect he'll take that momentum and form which he had in the latter stages of this season to compete once again and honour the 2-year contract that he has with Mercedes, running to the end of the 2023 season. But let's say hypothetically he was to leave, who would replace him? Before we take a look at those candidates, I want to take a moment to thank everyone who's subscribed over the course of the 2021 season. It's been an awesome year, but it's not stopping here. I have loads more post-season content to come, and of course we'll be looking forward to the new era of Formula One as well. Thanks. The potential candidates. I'm sure, given the recent rhetoric of the Mercedes team, that the thought of who might be able to fill the shoes of Lewis Hamilton must have been considered. It probably won't have been discussed, but you can't not consider that question when the team boss can't say for sure that their lead driver will return in March. And for me, I think there are 4 main candidates, some more likely than others. The first is Nick de Vries. I've commented on the Dutch driver before as he has recently become Formula E World Champion with the Mercedes EQ team. The 2019 F2 champion is clearly very talented, and Toto Wolff wanted that driver to get his shot in Formula 1, with his goal of getting him into the vacant Williams seat left by George Russell. But he failed in that aim, meaning De Vries remains in Formula E for Mercedes' last season in that category. Whilst I believe De Vries deserves a shot in Formula 1, it would certainly be a tall order to have your rookie season in the most successful team over the last 8 years. But he is under contract with Mercedes already and has some experience as their test and reserve driver, so it would certainly be an easy switch, but it would undoubtedly be a risk. The next option is trying to recall Valtteri Bottas from his move to Alfa Romeo. Now this would probably be the preferred choice for Mercedes. The reason Bottas left was because Wolff and Mercedes couldn't offer him a multi-year deal, as the team needed to carve out an opportunity for George Russell to graduate into the works team. But the Finn has 5 years of recent experience with them, and he would offer some stability as he has that experience that could prove vital through the new regulations. But getting him away from Alfa Romeo would be very difficult, and Wolff would need to lean on his relationship with their team principal, Fred Vasseur. Contracts have been bought out in Formula 1 before, and I'm sure Mercedes would be willing to pay. The third alternative option would be Stoffel Vandoorne. I think this is potentially the least likely candidate, but the Belgian driver is also racing for that Formula E Mercedes EQ outfit. He has a lot of talent and even a couple of years experience in Formula 1 where he raced for McLaren. I believe Vandoorne didn't really get a real chance in Formula 1, and being paired up with Fernando Alonso was never going to be an easy challenge, and ultimately he didn't prove himself enough to warrant remaining in the McLaren team for 2019. Vandoorne is another test and reserve driver for Mercedes, so it will be a quick signing to make, but personally I think this one is less likely to happen than the De Vries move. And the final option I could see being considered for that Mercedes seat is Esteban Ocon. The Frenchman used to be a Mercedes-backed driver and is still managed by Toto Wolff. He's had an excellent 2021 season with his first race victory coming at the Hungarian Grand Prix earlier this year. It was a brilliant result and he's well and truly earned his long-term deal with the Alpine team. But who wouldn't jump at the chance to switch to the most successful team in recent history? The other point to note here, in this hypothetical scenario within a hypothetical scenario, is that should Ocon move from Alpine, there is an Alpine Junior who's undoubtedly ready for a step up into Formula 1. Oscar Piastri is one of the most talented drivers out there, and perhaps the most talented driver that's outside of the sport at the moment. Piastri would do well to learn from Alonso in the Alpine setup, so whilst they wouldn't want to lose Ocon, I think the Alpine setup could be convinced by Mercedes and particularly Toto Wolff. Now, none of these options would be ideal for the Mercedes team. In Lewis Hamilton and George Russell, they have one of the strongest driver lineups in the sport, and a healthy mix of experience and youthful potential. It's got to be said, I think I'm not the only one looking forward to seeing that driver pairing next year. And aside from the Valtteri Bottas option, having two drivers in that Mercedes team that haven't raced for them before, apart from of course George Russell's single race in 2020, would undoubtedly be a risk. And this decision could lead to more mistakes as a whole from the Mercedes setup, so none would be ideal, but personally I think the Esteban Ocon option has some legs, but perhaps that's my wishful thinking, wanting to see Oscar Piastri on the grid for 2022. The reason this won't happen. As I've already mentioned, Lewis Hamilton is an incredibly talented driver and he's a fighter. I can't imagine him leaving the sport after this low, but Toto Wolff hasn't ruled it out as a possibility. It will be a shocking day when Hamilton decides to leave Formula 1, but I don't think this is the context that he will want to depart the sport. Hamilton has of course lost titles before, and he wants to compete for that 8th title, which would leave him a step ahead of Michael Schumacher in the all-time list. He will also want to prove himself against the future generation once again, competing with the likes of Max Verstappen, George Russell and Charles Leclerc, as all three of these drivers are now represented at the top teams of Formula 1. So Hamilton will be there to fight again. But what do you think? Is Hamilton going to retire? If so, who's going to replace him in that Mercedes seat? Let me know in the comment section. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and thanks very much for watching.